A return to form. A Dungeons and Dragons tale set in the golden age of heroes. Written and narrated by Quinn Jacobson, featuring familiar faces and the vocal talents of Benjamin Ballstrom voicing Soren, Sean Jacobson voicing Helio, Stephen Fredrickson voicing Orin, and Emma Utes voicing Cersei. A Return to Form, Chapter 1. Cersei. The world had changed. 6 years ago, the Sword Coast and beyond had united to stop the ultimate evil. 6 years ago, the Guardians of the Gate had led a mighty alliance of elves, men, dragonborn, celestials, and more to destroy Tiamat, the dragon goddess of evil. After slaying each of the 5 members of the Chroma Conclave over 3 continents, they, as a team, entered her dark abode and ended her. The greatest heroes of the age, wielding power the gods themselves couldn't match, had defeated Tiamat. Cersei herself had carried the blade that struck the final blow and ended the tyranny of dragons once and for all. She had slain the greatest evil the world had ever known, and in doing so saved the lives of every man, woman, and child in Faerun. Now, she runs a bakery. After facing the ultimate evil and claiming the last name of Kelfire, her greatest challenge would be customer service. It was a satisfying life. She kept in contact with her fellow guardians, Helio and Orin. The two had found their own slices of normality, happiness, and boredom. It wasn't their fault. 2 years of constant peril and adventure could spoil anyone. She told herself she'd had enough adventure for one life. Her twin swords, Flametongue and Frostfang, sat, with her armor, gathering dust in her estate. She kept training, of course. No reason to get rusty. But training with swords that can cut through steel isn't exactly practical. So she attacked straw dummies with sword-shaped wood. It reminded her of her youth, when she first started training with her sister. As she thought of her adventuring days, and how much she was looking forward to sparring with her father that day, the dull sound of a customer complaining reminded her of what she had been doing.
"So I want a full refund. This bagel is atrocious."
Cersei sighed with annoyance at his tone.
"You already ate the entire thing. I'm not refunding you."
Her voice came out low and bored, clearly frustrated with the man.
"This is unacceptable. I'll have you know."
The aging Dragonborn's voice went dull to her ears once again, and she shook her head.
"You know what, asshole? I don't need this. We're closing for the day."
She raised her hands and made a shooing motion. The old man planted his feet and crossed his arms.
"I'll have you know I'm a very important man in this."
As he tried to finish his sentence, Cersei leveled a stare at him. All of a sudden, he seemed to shrink. He shivered with what must have been fear and a terrible realization. This was a woman who had faced gods and demons and held her ground. She had seen world-ending threats and faced them without fear. Tiamat herself had fallen before her. He didn't stand a chance. His feet moved before he knew what was happening. He turned and fled the small bakery, spluttering his apologies. Cersei smiled to herself and with some satisfaction closed up the shop. As she locked the door, she breathed a deep breath of fresh air. The afternoon sun warmed her white scales. With a spring in her step, she turned and started walking toward the stone manse she calls home. Her efforts in saving the known world had earned her an estate in the ruined city of Stormkeep. Her adopted father, the Lord of Stormkeep, ensured it was rebuilt to her liking. The gold she earned from the bakery allowed her to keep a small, well-paid staff and a small force of guards. In the time since Stormkeep's destruction, it had grown considerably. Her father had led her people admirably in its reconstruction, and now the city prospered. Residences and businesses had cropped up to replace that which was lost. Though a day of mourning was held each year in remembrance of the lost, her people had largely moved on. She passed smiling townsfolk, many of whom didn't recognize her as Cersei the Adventurer. They simply knew her as the owner of the bakery down the road. As she approached her home's front gate, it swung open for her. She entered the well-kept front yard to her estate and waved, nodding to the groundskeepers and serving staff. Eventually, she made her way into the beautiful stone building and noticed a coat already on the rack by the door. Tilting her head, she called out for the steward.
"Gerald? We have company."
The portly older Dragonborn walked up to her and spoke with a voice full of sincerity and aged wisdom.
"Yes, my lady. Lord Kelfire has urgent business to discuss with you. I actually had a runner sent to find you. He must have been quick, if you're already home."
He tilted his head curiously.
I came of my own volition. Decided to close the bakery early today. A coincidence, I suppose.
She smiled at the steward. He approached and motioned for her coat. She shrugged it off.
Did you escort Lord Kelfire to the study?
The steward nodded respectfully. Yes, my lady. Destination in mind, Cersei started to walk up the dark wooden steps and shouted back playfully.
Bring some refreshments, please, Gerald. And I told you to call me Cersei.
Gerald chuckled. Of course, my lady. As you wish. The double doors to the study were open, revealing a tall red dragonborn wearing the stately robes of the ruling lord. A small adamantite band wrapped around his upper arm, marking him as the city's ruler. Stormkeep was well on the way to being rebuilt after the ruthless attack by Thordak and Scarron, the red and blue dragons respectively, had ruined much of the beautiful coastal city. He looked out the window, his hands clasped together behind his back. As Cersei entered the small room, her eyes flickered to the crossed red and blue swords on the mantel, as well as the black armor underneath them. The floor creaked as she stepped onto the plush carpet, and Eilmir turned his head, a smile crossing his face as he saw her. Daughter! You look radiant as ever! His stern demeanor quickly vanished as he walked toward her and pulled her into a hug. She felt the warmth of a father's love as he embraced her, something she'd never felt until being adopted into his family. She felt the tension of the morning leave her as he pulled away. She smiled at him warmly.
It's good to see you as well, Father.
His smile briefly widened, then slowly disappeared as his stoic nature took over. I wish I was just here to spar, Snowcone. Unfortunately, I'm here on business. He stepped back and clasped his hands behind his back again, a clue to his youth spent fighting border skirmishes on Drakeback. One of the finest Drake Knights in Draconia, he had protected the crossings between Draconia and Faerun for many years. He had also provided vital support in the battle against Tiamat, leading a battalion of his finest against Arkhan's hordes. A much older man now, he rarely rode anymore. His Drake retired from service alongside him, though he is a military man at heart, and that side of him took charge now. There's been rumors on the Sword Coast, stirrings of something happening in the underbelly of Waterdeep. He extended a hand towards Cersei, a letter bearing the broken seal of the Conclave had out to her. This was sent to me personally. One of the Conclave's agents has been digging and found some concerning evidence of cult activity. His gaze darkened. They suspect the cult of the dragon. Cersei took the message and read it herself, her eyes scanning the letter thoughtfully.
If this is true, Eilmir, why did they send you a letter? Surely there are agents on the Sword Coast that can handle this.
She put the letter down on her heavy writing desk, annoyed, and looked him in the eyes. A cold fury began to build in her. The Conclave had persecuted her and the Guardians, tried them for crimes they didn't commit. Now they had the gall to ask her for help? Eilmir met her fury with a placating expression. He approached her and took her hands in his. You are the greatest living hero in Faerun, Cersei. Helio is a teacher now. Oren is less effective than he used to be, and Castellon is in Avernus. Her hands, clenched into fists, loosened as he spoke reason to her frustration. His eyes met hers, and he nodded. This is their best choice. I can't blame them for reaching out. His expression turned grim, and a small moment of, was that fear, crossed his expression. If there is even a small chance this is about Tiamat, if they are trying to do it again, they need your expertise, Cersei. She felt her rage beginning to subside as she realized how serious this was. If Eilmir was worried, this was a real concern. She had distanced herself from the politics of the world since that day 6 years ago, but Eilmir kept his ear to the ground. If anyone could be trusted to know what was going on, it was him.
If you think this is something I should look into, I'll do it. I trust your judgment, Father.
She nodded and covered his hand with hers briefly before turning toward the displayed armor and weapons.
Besides, maybe a break from baking will do me some good.
She ran a hand down the side of her armor. A smile crept to her face.
Who knows? Maybe I'll even have some fun along the way.
While she had kept up her training, her life of comfort had made the fit of her armor a bit uncomfortable. Thankfully, its magical nature refit it to her now larger, more muscled form. She'd been eating much better and more consistently now that she was back in Draconia. With all her training, she'd actually managed to bulk up somewhat. It felt good, she found, to wear the armor of Kavan once again. The reassuring weight of Flametongue and Frostfang resting on her hips was a familiar joy. She took the metallic dwarven shortbow off the mantle and slung it over her shoulder as well. The bow she'd used against Tiamat had been destroyed. She would have liked to have Fenthras, but the metallic dwarven shortbow would have to do. It was enchanted to add power to her shots. The bow could put an arrow through steel at 50 paces, no mean feat for a shortbow. She gathered anything else she might need for the journey, potions, rations, and other rudimentary items. Gerald walked in during her preparation and laid down a small tray of bite-sized snacks and a pitcher of cool iced water. She and Islmere shared a short meal and talked of nothing important for a time. Together they left the estate and began to walk toward the noble district. She felt a pang of anxiety as she left the safety of her home. Her anxiety was quickly replaced with determination, however. Adventure awaited. As she walked toward the airship port in the noble district, alongside Islmere, the people began to take notice. She wasn't Cersei the baker, or Cersei the lady of House Calfire. She was Cersei the god-killer, her swords and armor marking her as a hero of the age. The 6 years hadn't been long enough for the people to forget her. They smiled and waved, and many wanted to shake her hand, thank her for all she'd done. It felt good to be back in her adventuring gear. Her mind drifted to her friends, and she felt a moment of regret they weren't here with her. If they were, Helio would no doubt be brooding, and Oren would be doing everything he could to cheer the group up. Her mind drifted to the others, Durin, Roscoe, even Castellon. So many who were dead or lost. The Guardians meant so much to the people of Faerun. She hoped they all knew it, even those who had passed on. She smiled and shook her head. She had a mission. Politely she moved through the crowd that had gathered. Word had spread that the Slayer of Tiamat was making an appearance, and all had come to see her. The crowd waved and called her name. She smiled and waved back. After being swarmed for some time, she and Islmere made it to the noble district, where they were able to move more freely. Looking ahead, she could see large wooden airships lifting off the ground to destinations unknown. The sails atop caught the wind as the large crystals sticking out of the sides powered the magic to grant them flight. In the time since Stormkeep was destroyed, Islmere had been building the airship port to be even larger than before. It was now a hub for fast, efficient trade between the cities of Draconia and even some of the cities of the Sword Coast. Noticing her gaze, Islmere spoke. "My personal airship will get you to Baldur's Gate." Cersei looked at him confused.
What about a teleport circle? Why waste time flying an airship?
He scowled and turned away. "Those buffoons at the Conclave have yet to provide us with permission to create the circles. Something about the Draconian Dragonborn needing to prove their trust after what happened with Arcan the Cruel." Cersei smirked.
You mean Farcan the...
Before she could finish her sentence, he cut her off with a sigh. "Farcan the Stinky. Yes." He chuckled briefly before his face turned serious. "I'm concerned, Cersei. The Conclave isn't telling me everything. They resent us, the Dragonborn." He shook his head. "Our people were instrumental in defeating Tiamat. They seem to have forgotten that." He looked up with a smile as they approached the airship bearing the symbol of House Calfire. "But that is a concern for me and my advisors. You've got more important things to worry about." She turned to say goodbye and found him beaming at her, his eyes filled with warmth and paternal love. "It's good to see you walk the streets a hero again, Cersei. I'm proud of you." She returned his smile in earnest and gave him a hug.
It's nice.
She gestured at her armor.
Though getting swarmed by thankful locals won't exactly help me stay, inconspicuous.
Chuckling, the two separated. As she walked up the gangway toward the airship, Calfire seemed to remember something and called out. "By the way, the agent who found this evidence of conspiracy is going to be meeting you in Baldur's Gate. Apparently you'll know him by sight. His name is Hugo. Hugo Dallar? Recognize the name?" Suddenly, the memory of battling the white dragon Keren flashed through her mind. She smirked.
It sounds familiar. Thanks for the heads up.
She walked up the gangway, waving back at Islmere as she did, reaching the top and turning to look out over the city one more time. The beauty of Stormkeep couldn't be ignored. In 6 years, they had restored much of the old cultural architecture and updated the aging infrastructure. The devastation wrought by Scarron and Thordak was a travesty the two dragons had paid for with their lives. Yet through a communal effort and the unwavering determination of her people, they had made the most of it. The towering spires, mixed with a newer style of building, made for an incredible skyline. She was about to head inside the airship when she felt a small twinge of magic. A dark power, familiar, and yet unnatural. Her hands dropped to the hilts of her swords and she scanned the horizon. On top of a building at least 500 feet away, she saw something. A man with a dark cloak, a small sword sheathed at his hip, and glowing green eyes burning underneath his hood. As she took this in, the figure vanished. All that in less than a heartbeat. She held still for a moment, waiting for an attack. After a minute passed, she relaxed. Whoever that was, they weren't interested in attacking her. For now. A nagging feeling crossed her mind. Something about him had been familiar. She shook her head clear of her doubts, let go of her swords, and was determined to keep an eye out for the mysterious figure. With that, she turned and entered the airship, ready to get going. Once again, she donned her armor, strapped on her swords, and strung her short bow. It felt good, like a return to form. The crossing over the vast ocean between Faerun and Draconia was an uneventful trip. It was especially beautiful by air, but one got tired of the same view after a few hours. The bag of holding she'd brought with her certainly made bringing luggage along much easier. Stashing her armor and weapons, she strolled the deck in a loose-fitting robe cut in the style of her people. The hem of the lower portion was cut just above the second knee and had slits on the side to allow for ease of movement. Cersei had decided when she was a teenager she'd never be caught wearing an outfit she couldn't fight in at a moment's notice. As she strolled the deck, she took in the smell of salty ocean air and smiled as she saw the seagulls tailing the ship. Approaching the railing next to the large prow, she closed her eyes, lifting her face to the sun and letting the warmth of the day embrace her. After a few minutes, her quiet meditation was interrupted by a growl coming from her stomach.
Guess it's time for a spot of breakfast.
She turned and walked back across the deck, greeting the sailors performing their duties as she went. They nodded and gave slight bows of respect as she walked past. The deck creaked underfoot as the large airship rode the tides of the winds. However, her shore footing made her stand out even among the seasoned sailors. Balance was one of her great strengths, and here it showed. She made her way to the stairs and stepped down. The smell of salt was quickly replaced with cooking bread and sausage, as well as the sound of sizzling eggs and bacon. The smells and sounds reminded her of the hunger that had driven her down here, and she moved with some speed to a small table. Sitting down, a young man wearing white clothing approached her and offered her a menu. "Good morning, my lady. Is there anything you'd like to drink this morning? I've just put a fresh pot of tea on, but we also offer juice and fresh water, if you'd prefer." She sat thoughtful for a minute.
I'll have some tea, thank you. That sounds lovely.
He bowed slightly and returned to the kitchen. Cersei looked around the room and saw a small crowd of passengers, mostly dignitaries and ambassadors to the conclave. Her eyes darted to the few soldiers on board as well, taking count of the number of swords and small crossbows, as well as how many and how well armored they were. When she started planning out how best she could attack them, reading their body language, figuring out who would be easiest to kill first, she had to force herself to stop. Even after 6 years of peaceful living, she was still reminding herself she wasn't constantly in danger anymore. As she pondered this, the young man returned with a steaming pot of tea and a small cup. He set it down, and she ordered her breakfast. As he returned to the kitchen, her mind drifted once again. Those times in her past had been terrible, dangerous, and painful. Yet, she found herself wishing she was there again, fighting side by side with her friends. It had felt safer when they were with her. Those years had formed them into an unstoppable weapon, and together they'd been unstoppable. She sighed and took a sip of tea.
You're safe here. You're happy here. Enjoy your tea in peace, damn it!
She whispered to herself in a hushed tone. Finishing her breakfast, she returned to her room. Sitting down in the small pool of sunlight streaming through the circular window, at the foot of the room's bed she suddenly saw a white raven on the small windowsill. She opened the window and let the small bird inside, smiling as she recognized it. A message from one of her closest friends, Helio. The bird hopped into the room and stood on her desk. She spoke a command phrase only those most trusted among the Guardians would know.
Dave was the real hero.
At this, the bird stopped moving for a moment. Its eyes glazed over, and it slowly sat down. After a minute or so, the bird's eyes cleared, and it stood looking directly at Cersei.
Cersei!
A familiar voice called out from the raven, and she found herself smiling despite herself.
Elia!
She shouted as she gave the bird a pat on the head. To hear her friend's voice, strained by old age as it was, washed away her paranoia. The bird tilted its head and seemed to smile back at her. The old voice strained out again.
I heard you were coming to the Sword Coast and wanted to see about meeting up. You know, the three of us.
She thought for a moment and shrugged. Iolmir must have told him she was coming.
I'd love to visit. I'm coming back on business, unfortunately.
She took some time to explain everything, the conclave, the dragon cults, and Hugo. Helio listened carefully, and the bird nodded as she spoke. He seemed pretty calm about all this, though that could just be because they were communicating through a bird.
We should meet up after I'm done, though. It'd be good to see you in person again.
The thought of getting to see him face to face warmed her heart.
Maybe we can meet up at Orin's place. I hear he has quite the home in Waterdeep.
The raven bobbed its head, and through it she could imagine Helio doing the same. His voice called out once more from the raven.
Well, Cersei, my apprentice says the spell is about to end, so I'm gonna let you go. If you need anything, let me know.
She nodded at the bird.
Of course, Helio. I'll let you know. Be safe, brother.
The raven's eyes glazed over once again for a moment before the bird regained sentience and flew out the window. She watched it go and felt a weight settle in her chest. Once again she would be going into danger, though unlike before, she was now one of the strongest beings in Faerun. Right? After another few days' travel, the Sword Coast came into view, and she saw the familiar skyline of Baldur's Gate. With the airship approaching the city, she saw the gate from which the Guardians got their name. She remembered their time here, fighting the Blackfeather's evil schemes, and trying their best to restore Elturel to the mortal plane. Her mind drifted to Alder, his sacrifice, all the unseen work he had done to ensure their victory that day. The Coalition would never have existed without him. The Guardians may have struck the blow that killed Tiamat, but without Alder, the battle would have been over before it began. She sighed and whispered a quiet prayer to his eternal spirit. The wind carried it away toward the city he was born to, the city he had ruled. She returned to her cabin and gathered her things. She left her armor in the bag of holding with Frostfang and her bow, belting Flametongue to her hip. Once the airship landed, she bid farewell to the crew on board and walked down the gangplank. As she strolled down the ramp, the sounds and smells of the city hit her like a hammer. The port was very busy. Merchants sold spiced meats and fragrant herbs. Dock workers walked past bearing cargo and luggage to ships bound for unknown destinations. The smell of salt and brine mixed with sweat and ale. She didn't enjoy the smell, but she liked being back here. She'd lived here for many years among the thieves and scum of the city, learning her trade. She'd found happiness here, what happiness she could after being exiled from her home. The people she'd met had been mostly good, trying to make ends meet in a world that didn't care. Her trip down memory lane was cut short when a tall, clean-shaven man with black shoulder-length hair approached, the slightly sharp tips of his ears the only feature that revealed his elven heritage. "Hey there. How's civilian life been treating you?" He walked toward her, a stoic expression on his face, his hand extended for a shake. Cersei grasped it and shook it firmly.
It's all right. A bit boring for my taste, but I can't complain.
She released his hand, and he motioned for her to follow him. "We should talk somewhere more private. Our mission is classified by the Conclave. Need to know." As they walked, Cersei noticed that Hugo looked cautious. His eyes darted to alleyways as they passed. His hands fidgeted in his pockets when others walked close by. She didn't say anything to him. A bit of paranoia couldn't hurt considering what they were investigating. After arriving at a local tavern, they were escorted to a small private conference room. "Wait a second." Hugo's eyes flashed bluish-purple as he scanned the room. "Good. No one bugged the room." Cersei tilted her head with concern.
Should we be worried about that? What exactly is going on, Hugo? Your letter was vague about the threat we're dealing with.
He sat down in one of the chairs and motioned for her to do the same. She did, and he leaned forward over the table, ready to explain all he had learned. Chapter 2. Detective Work. Hugo. What a life he led. Whenever those close to him learned he was an agent for the Conclave, they often had a very exciting picture of his life. Sneaking into secure locations, breaking open vaults, suave one-liners, and spiffy outfits. The reality was a lot different. He wore a tanner's disguise today. The smell of piss and shit that followed those in this trade dissuaded guards from searches. Common folk avoided them at all times. It allowed one to blend in quite well. He used this disguise often, as its effectiveness could not be argued. Didn't mean he had to like it. Oh, how I wish there was a better way to avoid attention on a stakeout. Sure, magic had its place. It could create sights, smells, even sounds that mimicked real life almost perfectly. Almost. And almost perfect isn't good enough. Any passing mage with some skill could see through an illusion, not to mention all illusions but the highest level were dissipated with a touch. Still, sitting on the side of the gutter smelling of human waste was less than ideal. He sat and slowly ate a small piece of bread and cheese, watching the small brewery across the street. Guards did not look at him, and walked across the street to avoid him. No one was asking questions, no one gave him a second glance. Just how he liked it. He'd been sitting here for the past 2 hours, waiting for something to happen. His informants in Waterdeep Harbour had informed him of suspicious crates being delivered here. The crates came straight from the dock, sealed. No inspections, no stops along the way. Covered wagons with 4 guards each seemed an exaggerated presence for crates delivered inside the city. So here he was, sitting in the street, waiting for a delivery. He heard it before he saw it. Clopping hooves and the sound of iron-rimmed wheels rolling across cobbled streets. He watched the wagon arrive from under the brim of his hat, taking note of the burned insignia of the delivery company on the side. A cargo ship with 3 letters on its sail, WCT. Burning the symbol into memory, he waited as 2 men exited the brewery and began unloading the crates stacked in the back. From the strain they exhibited as they lifted, the crates were clearly heavy. Far too heavy to be hops or grain. Suddenly, something caught his eye. There was a symbol tattooed on the wrist of one of the men lifting the crates. A large glaring eye with strange symbols around it. Hugo knew many languages, but the symbols were unfamiliar to him. He watched as they continued to unload crates. Nothing else jumped out at him, so he waited a half hour after the wagon left before getting up himself. He slouched his posture and strolled away, heading for the slums where he had rented a room above a butcher's shop. The smell of blood and raw meat assailed him as he walked up the stairs. Having already washed the piss and shit stink off him in the harbour, he headed up. The butcher gave him a callous look as he did, but said nothing. The stairs creaked in protest as his weight settled on them. Clearly this place needed some repair. He entered his room and gently closed the door, the hinges squealing as he did. There's a reason he chose places like this. Anyone trying to sneak in here would have rickety stairs and screaming hinges to deal with. Finally, he stripped the dirty clothes off his lean frame and put on something more decent. He washed his face and hair in the small basin of fresh water and went to the window. He opened it and looked down at the dirty alley below. Concentrating, he summoned a small, clear blade, appearing to be made of slightly purple glass. This was a psionic blade made of his own willpower. Throwing it into a part of the alley darkened by the butcher's shop, he appeared in the same spot with a faint popping noise of displaced air. He quickly scanned the alley for anyone who may have seen this. When no threats or witnesses appeared, he nodded to himself and strolled with confidence out of the alley, heading toward the nicer part of town, where the great library of Waterdeep's Mages College resided. As he made his way up the street, he noticed the change between the slums and the merchants' quarter immediately. Waterdeep was a beautiful city. Though it was common knowledge there was a massive wealth disparity. A small wall divided the 2 parts of the city, and upward mobility from the slums to any other part of Waterdeep was the opposite of commonplace. There were exceptions, of course. Usually anyone with magical talent could expect to be tutored at the college, though those were exceptions that proved the rule. He showed his papers at the gate between city sections and was allowed passage. He walked the now cobbled street and nodded politely to those around him. In the slums, avoiding attention was standard practice. However, in this part of the city, avoiding attention would only make himself appear more suspicious. The slums were constantly filled with the smell of the harbour, rotting fish, open gutters, and pure, unwashed humanity. This portion of the city was different. The closed sewage system and the fact people could bathe regularly allowed the smell of clean air and perfumes, both natural and not, to fill the air with their pleasant scents. As he walked, he passed many buildings and saw merchants peddling their goods. Everything from weapons and travelling gear to cookware and books were sold along the thoroughfare. He looked up as the tall spires of the college came into view, its gleaming white stone run through with veins of blue crystal that put the building in stark contrast with the rest of the city. As he drew closer to the college that dominated the horizon, he entered the residential district of Waterdeep. Here, the wealthy merchants and the lower nobility lived. There were many ostentatious and towering estates along the main street, though what stood out to him was a low stone building on the side of the street. It caught his attention, and he recognized the short figure in the yard. One-armed and muscled like an ox, he recognized Oren, playing in the yard with a young girl. She beamed up at him, eagerly swinging a small wooden axe. He fell to the ground under her vicious blows, feigning death to great exaggeration. Laughter carried through the air as they both lay next to each other. In that moment, Hugo wanted nothing more than to greet his old friend, to talk of their battles and reminisce about days past. He turned away and kept walking. He was working and couldn't afford to waste time. Knowing Oren, they'd end up drinking, and before he knew it, a day would have passed. He muttered to himself, "It's good to see you, friend." Lowering his head to hide his face, he continued walking. The college continued to grow in size as he approached. its shadow cast over much of the city. He showed his papers to the guards at the entrance to the grounds and was allowed entry. Hugo entered the college and quickly made his way to the library. Entering the large room, he was once again amazed at the enormous store of knowledge it contained. The library was mostly focused toward magical studies, but it did also contain a wealth of historical information. Approaching a young apprentice at the main counter, he spoke. "Good afternoon. I'd like..." The apprentice raised a hand. One finger pointed up to silence him. After a long few seconds, the man dropped his hand and replied in a monotone, "Welcome to the library. How may I assist you today?" Hugo gritted his teeth in annoyance and forced a polite tone into his voice. "I'd like to peruse your symbology section. I also need a record of the local businesses in Waterdeep and their addresses." The apprentice sighed deeply and raised his eyebrows. Raising his hand, pointer finger extended, he pointed towards a section of the shelves on the second floor. "Symbology should be on the shelves over there. I assume you can manage from there?" Looking under his desk, he grabbed a small stone with a spiral rune engraved on it. "I'll have those business records brought here for you. The stone will turn blue when it's ready. Also, just a reminder, no materials can be taken from the library without permission. And if you're feeling nice, please put the books back where you found them. It makes our job significantly easier." Before Hugo could respond, he looked back down at the tome he was studying. Shaking his head, Hugo went to do some research. This was the other part of his job that wasn't terribly glamorous. Research. He spent 4 hours in a corner of the room flipping through pages and pages of text, trying to find some relevant information, and turned up exactly nothing. The tattoo the man wore wasn't mentioned in any of the books he was reading. He'd managed to find the address of the delivery company at least, but that symbol bothered him. Something about it was familiar. He felt like he'd seen it before, even if only in passing. As he felt the memory come to the forefront of his mind, a loud bell rang twice in succession. He was unaware of its purpose until he saw people around him begin standing up and leaving the library. He tried to regain his train of thought, but couldn't find his focus. "Goddamn bell! Shit!" He stood up and replaced the books on the shelves. Sliding them home, he grunted with annoyance and strolled away. He pressed his hand to his forehead, trying through sheer force of will to bring the memory back to the forefront of his mind. Damn. No dice. He kept walking until he was stopped by the young apprentice at the front desk. The young man grabbed his attention. "Hey you! Wait a minute!" Hugo sighed with frustration and turned, ready to unleash his annoyance, until he noticed an elven woman standing beside him. The librarian spoke. "She's a symbology expert. You seemed a little out of your depth, so I asked her if she'd be willing to help." Hugo stood stunned for a moment, surprised the youth had gone to such lengths. Nodding his thanks, Hugo turned to the woman. "Good evening. I'd hate to take up any more of your time than needed, but I was curious if you recognized this symbol?" Hugo pulled a charcoal drawing he'd rendered of the tattoo from his coat pocket and handed it to her. She took it from him silently and studied it. Tilting her head, she traced the symbol with her finger. "This symbol is strange, to say the least. Where did you see it?" Hugo told her of the tattoo and its placement on the man's wrist. "Based on the shape and placement of the symbols, I'd guess this is a cult symbol. The open eye could mean many things, but more than likely represents bringing a god or some other being into the world." Hugo's eyes went wide as she handed the paper back to him. Recovering quickly from his shock, he says, "Thank you, my lady. Your help is most appreciated." He tucked the paper away and started walking with some haste out of the building. He needed to contact the Conclave immediately. Based on recent events and what he'd just been told, he could reach only one conclusion. Someone was trying to summon Tiamat. Again. The next job. Hugo, Cersei. "So that's how we got here. Any questions?" Hugo said. The two sat in the same tavern. An hour had passed, and 2 empty plates plus a few empty mugs sat between them. The sounds of the bustling tavern had gotten quieter outside the conference room.
What happened with the delivery company?
Cersei asked. "A fair question," Hugo responded. "I was ordered to stand by until you made contact, so we're going to handle that investigation together." His expression soured. "Guess my superiors don't trust me to handle this alone." His gaze rose to meet Cersei's, and there was a flicker of frustration behind his eyes. Clearly, he didn't think her aid was needed, and being held back to wait for her annoyed him greatly.
Look, Hugo, I'm not here to replace you. Your investigative work is the only reason we know what's going on.
She leaned back, keeping her gaze locked on him.
You're leading this one. I'm just a very sneaky helper.
She smirked at him and chuckled lightly. Hugo found a smile rising through his stoic demeanor as she spoke. He reached over the table with his hand extended. Partners, then? His hand hung between them, waiting for Cersei's response. She grasped his hand firmly and shook.
Partners.
She turned and looked outside the room's only window to see a rapidly darkening sky.
What do you say? Should we get some sleep and tackle this tomorrow?
Hugo nodded and put a small pile of silvers and coppers on the table. Sliding a key across the table, he said, "I've already got you a room here. 2nd floor, 3rd door on the right." He stood up and began walking toward the flight of stairs in the room's corner. "See you at first light, Cersei. Get some rest." With the rising of the sun, the duo made their way out of the inn and walked toward Waterdeep Harbor. Both decided to wear regular clothes. Cersei's dragon-like features weren't easy to hide, but without access to powerful magic, there was little to be done about that fact. The town was still asleep as they walked, the streets were quiet, and the morning air was cool and wet. A refreshing breeze blew, and Cersei took a moment to appreciate the calm beauty of the quiet morning as they walked. As the sun climbed over the horizon, the reddish-purple hues of sunrise slowly began to turn to their normal blue. The city began to wake, and the people began to open stores and set up stalls. She saw a bakery open its doors as the smell of fresh bread filled the air. She smiled and remembered home for a moment. "Hello? Cersei?" A voice drew her back to reality. She turned her head, confused, to look at Hugo. "Did you catch a word I just said?" She shook her head, embarrassed.
Sorry, I got distracted. What were you saying?
Hugo chuckled and shook his. "Just laying out the plan for when we get there. We need access to the manifest from yesterday around midday." He paused, looking around them as they walked, scanning for potential threats. It's not technically legal to look at this information, by the way, so we're going to need to gain access subtly. Cersei nodded.
So are we breaking in then? What's the plan?
Hugo put out a hand to stop her, pointing out that their destination was just ahead. It was a squat building, a solid stone foundation at its base. The rest of the building was made of a light wood. There was a large yard behind it, barely visible from the street. As they stood watching the building, a wagon rolled out from the alleyway leading to the yard. A single-story building that had a small sign swinging over the front door, bearing the sigil Hugo had been looking for. "All right, Cersei. Here's the plan." Hugo entered the delivery building, now wearing a fine coat and trousers, and approached the front desk, behind which stood an older dwarven gentleman. The man stroked his beard thoughtfully while examining what appeared to be a ledger in front of him. Hugo cleared his throat. The dwarven man shot up, his eyes widening in surprise.
My goodness! You have my apologies, sir. Welcome to the Waterdeep Courier and Transport Services. My name is Regnus. How can I help you today?
Hugo put on the airs of a dissatisfied customer. Turning up his nose and placing his hands behind his back, he scanned the room. He wiped his finger along the desk and rubbed it against his thumb. "I am Lord Gerard Crumsworth of Crownspire. I was informed you were one of the best delivery services in the city. Was I mistaken?" Hugo's eyes darted to the window, pointed toward the alley, and saw a patch of shadow moving. Anyone else would have missed it, but he was looking for it. The dwarf noticed his gaze and began to turn. Hugo reacted quickly, shouting for the dwarf's attention.
First you ignore me when I enter the room, now you ignore me when I'm right in front of you.
The dwarf snapped his head back to Hugo.
My sincerest apologies, good sir.
He stumbled over his words for a moment, and Hugo looked down at the leather-bound book in front of him. He saw a pool of shadow coalesce in the dark hallway behind the dwarf. He needed to get this man away from that ledger so Cersei could figure out who was sending the deliveries and what was inside them. As Regnus made to speak, Hugo jumped in.
I would like to inspect your yard. I'll need to see if your wagons are good enough to carry my goods. Lead the way.
Hugo hurried the man along before he could protest, giving the shadowed hallway a nod, hoping Cersei understood. Cersei watched Hugo and the fumbling dwarf leave the building and start walking around the back. She felt the shadows release her as she walked into the light bathing the front room. She approached the ledger and started flipping through pages, looking for yesterday's midday deliveries. As she turned pages, she found that day missing from the books. A line of torn paper, the only hint that there had been a page there at all. She started flipping pages back and forth with frustration, realizing this was a dead end.
Shit.
She was preparing to keep looking. Maybe there was a secret ledger somewhere when she heard voices approaching. Acting fast, she snuck over to the window and teleported to a patch of shadow in the alleyway. Just in time as the door swung open as the small pool of shadows retreated from where she had just been. Hugo and Regnus re-entered the small room, Regnus talking about the wagon's capabilities as well as more detailed information about schedules and logistics. As soon as Regnus went behind the counter, Hugo spoke up. "Thank you for your time. I'll be sure to keep you in mind for the future. Goodbye." Without another word, and despite the dwarves' stumbling protests, Hugo walked out the door. Meeting at the small cafe up the street after changing back into their regular attire, the duo sat and discussed. I must say that a bag of holding is handy for carrying around disguises. Usually I'd have to go back and forth to whatever inn I'm staying at. Cersei smiled and nodded.
It's a useful item for sure. We made good use of it in our journey. I'm glad to see it's getting some use again.
She looked down at the bag, briefly getting lost in the past. She snapped out of it, realizing Hugo had asked her a question.
Sorry, what did you just ask? I got a little lost there.
She chuckled as she spoke. He shook his head and repeated himself. What did you see on the ledger, Cersei? Sighing, she said,
Nothing. The page from yesterday got torn out. It looks like whoever did it was in a hurry.
Hugo pressed his hands to his head, frustration evident in his expression. Sighing deeply, he looked back at her. Well, that was the only way for us to find out who's sending the crates. I guess we can wait at the harbor and find which ship they're coming off. Then we can... Hugo began to speak faster and faster, seemingly to himself. He kept going until Cersei had an idea.
Wait, Hugo, why don't we just go to the brewery? Once we know what's in the crates, we'll at least be able to narrow down the list of suspects.
Hugo paused, considering. He leaned back in his chair and sighed. Crossing his arms, he responded. That's not a bad idea. Maybe whoever took this page is involved with that brewery. Who else would have a cause to hide that page from the ledger? A careful smile crossed his face as he looked up at Cersei. You know, you've got a knack for this. Wish I'd had you here from the... He paused, leaning forward toward the window next to them. His eyes narrowed. Who's that? He pointed out the window, and Cersei turned to see where he was looking. A figure crouched on the roof across from them, the same one she'd seen in Stormkeep before boarding the airship. Green fire flashed from beneath the hood, and the figure raised its hand, holding a torn piece of paper. Hugo suddenly stood up. Is that fucking Soren? He whipped around the table, followed closely by Cersei. Looking up at the roof where they had just seen him, Cersei saw Hugo reach his hand back, a small throwing knife that looked to be made of wavy glass appearing in his hand. He threw it toward the building and suddenly vanished. He reappeared with a pop of displaced air on the roof. Cersei grumbled.
Magic. Takes all the work out of it.
She ran, faster than a mortal should be capable of, and leapt toward the wall. She cleared half its height with her first leap and clambered up the rest of the wall with little effort. Lifting herself over the edge, she saw Hugo already pursuing the cloaked figure, both making good time as they leapt from roof to roof.
Wish I'd kept my armor on.
She spoke to herself as she took off. Even with their head start, she made good time. She saw the two trading magical attacks, Hugo throwing psionic knives and Soren responding with spear-like blasts of eldritch fire. Hugo was no slouch, but Soren carried the power of an eldritch god inside him. He should have been able to take Hugo out by now. She caught up with Hugo, then slowed down so they could move together. Even with both next to each other, the eldritch fire didn't touch them. Soren had just landed on the roof opposite. As Hugo and her leapt across the large alleyway, Soren turned. She saw the trap a moment too late. Raising his hands, a blazing green symbol appeared on the rooftop. Already in the air, there was nothing they could do. Hugo started to create a knife, desperation on his face. He'd seen it too. Time slowed, and she watched as they descended. With a flash of light, the pair landed, right where Soren had been leading them. Chapter 3. Old friends? Soren, Cersei, Hugo. Here they were, at the mercy of some deranged lunatic. Oh, and he's also a guardian of the gate. He was technically inducted as a member after the battle with the Black Dragon, Dirgith. He travelled with Cersei, Helio, Oren, and Castellon for a couple of weeks before vanishing, off to pursue his own goals. He reappeared after the defeat of Elmar, the Green Dragon. After a few mishaps, he vanished again, right before the battle with the Blue Dragon, Scarron. Now here they were, caught in his trap.
Floating a few feet off the ground with sickly green energy surrounding them, Hugo and Cersei were stuck. Cersei looked to see Hugo focusing on his open hand. Purple sparks began to appear, and Soren cleared his throat.
Your mind magic won't work in there, Hugo. I made sure of that.
Something in his voice sounded off. He was shaky. His hands were wringing together anxiously, and he couldn't seem to maintain eye contact for more than a few seconds before his head started turning to look around. His skin was pale, and his face was gaunt. It looked like he hadn't got a good night's rest in years. He started to pace back and forth in front of them, muttering quietly for them to hear. This went on until Cersei interrupted.
Soren, what the fuck are you doing? Let us out now!
She began to struggle against whatever force held them. If only she was wearing her armor, she'd be out in a heartbeat. Soren stopped his muttering and pacing and seemed to focus on her.
I can't. Not until you know.
He walked toward the floating pair. The sheet of paper he taunted them with crumpled in his fist.
They always know. No hiding. Just running. For half a decade. They won't leave me be. The voices don't stop.
He pressed his hands into his head as if it would help.
I've tried everything. Nothing helps.
He holds up the piece of paper to her, unraveling it in front of her.
Power! Power! They won't stop until the bridge is done.
He fell to his knees in front of her, and the spell holding them vanished. She noticed now there were tears in his eyes.
Please. Please help me.
Cersei and Hugo landed on their feet as the spell faded. Hugo looked at Cersei questioningly. She shrugged and squatted down in front of him.
Soren, what happened to you? Who's chasing you?
Soren looked up to meet her gaze and began to explain. The gentle rocking of older Ravenguard's interceptor helped Soren fall asleep. He knew he needed the rest, and was thankful he could get any sleep at all. The battle with Scarron was nearly upon them. The time-lost island he had made his lair was the destination for this conflict. Soren was worried. Time was a dangerous force. Any who could manipulate it would surely be unbeatable. He lay in his cot and felt the comforting darkness of sleep begin to take him. With a tear of space and a sound like knives on steel, he felt himself torn from where he lay and sent somewhere else. He sat up with a start. Looking around the dark space, he realized his body was in perfect illumination. A distant horizon appeared, the color of blood. A dark moon rose. It cast the landscape into life. Gnarled trees made of flesh and bone, with shadows stretching toward the garish red light. A ripple, like an ocean wave, roiled across the landscape toward him. The landscape in its path changed. He felt it under his hands, still pressed into the ground beside him. No longer was he kneeling in black sand. He was kneeling on warm grey flesh with veins of green and yellow shot through it. Just as fast, it once again turned to the reddish-black stone, shot through with clear crystal. Soren stood confused when a rumbling tone surrounded him, slowly warbling into a recognizable language.
The bridge, become as one with it, as flesh becomes stone and ash. Become the channel for the purging fire.
The voice rose and fell in pitch.
With fire and stone and storm, the sleeper will wake. You must wake.
Soren felt himself lifted into the air, and 1,000 images flowed through his mind. He understood with perfect clarity what was going to happen to him. He slammed back into the ground, and that knowledge left him. He screamed and felt something tear in his mind. With a violent explosion of pain that felt like his head had been splintered apart, the knowledge fled, leaving a gaping hole of understanding in his mind. He tried to cross its threshold,
with his waking mind and immediately felt pain beyond belief. He left his mind and looked up, feeling a steady drip of black blood streaming out of his nose and down his throat. He stood to see spectral beings, in shapes he couldn't describe or fully understand, slowly floating toward him, like seeds in the wind. He didn't know what they were, but every survival instinct in his body screamed at him to run. He scrambled to his feet, sprinting away. He turned to see they hadn't sped up, so he stopped. Raising his hand, he launched a spear of green fire at the beings. He watched and despaired as it passed through them without harm.
Shit.
He fled again, getting distance between him and the strange beings.
What the fuck am I gonna do?
1 year later.
The two fuckers never stop. Their pursuit is endless. At least they're slow. My powers don't work on them. I need to find a way out. I think whoever is in charge of this realm wants to use me as a bridge of some kind. But at least Bones is gone. It's nice to have a bit of peace and quiet for a change. I just hope Yorin is okay.
5 years later.
I can't sleep. Doesn't seem like I need to, which is odd. I've named my pursuers. I'm calling them, well, pursuers. They never stop. I've been running for 5 years, and they never stop. My understanding of my abilities is growing. I'm getting close to a solution. I can feel it.
50 years later.
This can't be real. This must be a dream. I'm asleep on the ship. Oh, I've tried to end it, you know. Every time I do, I just wake up under the soil of this place. Like it's trying to consume me. The endless silence. Oh, I wish Bones were here. Oh, the pursuers never stop. They never stop.
Years later.
The pursuers never stop. The pursuers never stop. The pursuers never stop. Oh, the pursuers never stop. The pursuers never stop.
The bridge. Soren, Cersei, Hugo. Finishing his recollection, he seemed to recover somewhat. He stood and waved his hand, the green circle disappearing as his mind turned lucid.
My memory from that time is odd. I went insane, then painfully sane, then back again. I don't know what I am now. When I arrived back in Faerun, I was on the shores of Baldur's Gate. I made my way back into the city and found out only 2 weeks had passed since I left.
Soren explained how happy he'd been that the Guardians were successful. Knowing that Tiamat wasn't going to destroy the entire known world was reassuring. Soon after awakening, he had made his way to Elturel, hearing tales of the Guardians' victory over the goddess from the people of the realm. He entered Elturel and was shocked and devastated to learn of Older Ravengard's death. Their relationship hadn't been as close as others, he knew, but the man had helped him in some dark times. He headed to the Hall of Heroes and saw his own statue had been erected in the Guardians' Hall. Right next to that, it couldn't be. It was here that Soren learned of Yoren's fate. He left his only true friend a message before fleeing the city. Laying the small tablet at the foot of his statue, he uttered a small prayer, glad at least that Yoren had gotten the revenge he sought before his end. Leaving the city, the shock of what had happened to his closest friend broke him. An unknowable amount of time spent in what he could only call hell had broken him. He had bouts of insanity and miserable lucidity. Each period was unpredictable and lasted an unknown period of time. He'd stayed away from civilization, hoping to avoid hurting anyone, It was after one of his bouts of insanity that he'd woken up amongst a group of dead men and women wearing robes bearing an open eye. Scanning the corpses, it was clear they'd been here to capture him rather than kill him, carrying iron chains and wicked-looking ropes covered in spikes dripping with a strange fluid. Hearing this, Hugo spoke up. "Of course! That's where I'd seen that symbol before." He shows Soren the charcoal sketch he rendered. "Like this, right?" Soren's eyes widened, and he nodded with a raised eyebrow of suspicion. "Every single time you throw those spears, this symbol briefly appears on your palm. Only for a moment." Cersei tilts her head at Hugo, questioning.
You noticed that?
She crosses her arms and chuffs, smiling at the man and nodding with respect. Hugo smirks. "I notice everything." Soren waves his hands around. Some of his old demeanor bleeds through his broken psyche.
Ugh, are you two done flirting? You need to hear this. I wasn't finished.
He rises to his feet, wiping away his tears and brushing off his jacket. He rolls his shoulders and seems to more closely resemble the Soren that Cersei once knew. The posture, the cocky smile that oozes sass and arrogance.
In the years since they started chasing me, well, I've learned that these cultists want to use me as a bridge. Whatever that means.
Hugo steps towards Soren and puts hands on his shoulders, meeting his gaze. They want to use you as a gateway. They want to bring their god into the world, through you. A flash of memory shoots through Soren. The pillar of flesh, the knife, the man made of darkness between the stars. He snapped back. They'd tried to do this to his sister, turning her into an abominable mountain of flesh to collect the strength needed to awaken their sleeping god. Cersei cleared her throat nearby, tapping her foot impatiently.
So, we need to stop them, right?
She turned her head between the two men and raised her eyebrows pointedly.
What's our plan? Should we still investigate that brewery?
Hugo and Soren both stop and think for a moment. Hugo speaks first. "The brewery should be our first step. We need to know what those deliveries are. Maybe through them we can find out who's running this operation." Soren nods his agreement. He turns to Cersei with a cheeky grin.
You might want to wear your fancy armor this time, though. If my trap caught you, theirs definitely will.
She felt her fury rise at his jab, but pushed it down. "He's trying to bait you, Cersei," she thought. "Let it ride."
Glad to see 1,000 years now hasn't changed you, Soren. Let's get moving so we can save your sorry ass.
The trio spent some time preparing themselves atop the roof. Cersei putting on the armor of Kavan and belting on her twin short swords. Hugo put on a light set of leathers that he concealed underneath his long overcoat.
That bag of holding is really something,
comments Soren as he casts a series of defensive spells around himself. Green fire forms symbols of protection around him that vanish from sight. The group descends from the rooftop in their own fashions, Soren gently gliding down using his eldritch power, Hugo teleporting to a thrown sideblade, and Cersei teleporting into a small pool of shadow. She looks at the three and finds a ghost of a smile crossing her features. This wasn't exactly the Guardians of the Gate, but she had fought great monsters alongside both of these men. To go into battle for the good of the world once again felt good. Memories of the many times she had faced evil, of the many faces she'd called friend. The emotion of it felt overwhelming. She let a small smile break through as the trio made their way through the back alleys of Waterdeep. Eventually they arrived at the back door of the brewery they'd been looking for. Time to get back into the fight. Time to venture back into the maw. Chapter 4. Into the Maw. Soren, Cersei, Hugo. It was dark when they began their infiltration, waiting for much of the staff to leave. There was a high chance many who worked here had no clue what was going on underneath their noses. Watching them leave, Hugo sent a signal, and Cersei began picking the lock to the back door. After a few seconds of metallic clicking, her adamantine lockpick slipped the tumblers and allowed the door to open. She gestured forward to Soren.
Age before beauty,
she said with a sly smile and a wink. Shaking his head, he walked in, flipping her off as he walked by. She went in next, followed by Hugo, who silently closed the door behind them. The three could see decently well in the dim light of the storage area. Soren's eyes flashed green as he scanned the room.
What exactly are we looking for again?
Hugo creeped up behind him and said, "We're looking for large wooden crates, about 4 feet tall and 8 feet long. Whatever's in them is going to be heavy as fuck." Cersei nods and starts slowly walking toward one of the many shelves in the large room. Looking over her shoulder at the two, she says,
We should split up. We don't want to be in here for long. Let's make this quick.
The group splits off by themselves and starts checking boxes. They search for some time with no success. Various boxes lay open, revealing a vast assortment of various herbs and metallic equipment, filters, and other brewing equipment. Cersei stood amidst the 4 shelves she'd already checked and sighed in annoyance. As she starts moving to double-check, she hears the sound of a door creaking open. Immediately, she crouches low, hoping the others will hear and will do the same. Shadows cover her form just as a lantern light fills the room. 2 men in robes bearing a familiar design enter. "Apparently the bridge is near. The Lord's wrath can sense his presence." They start heading toward one of the shelves placed against the wall of the room. "Yes, the circle is complete. All that is required is his presence." The sound of metal scraping along stone can be heard, and the lantern light fades, along with the sound of the 2 men's voices. "With the chains, we can..." The sound of scraping is heard once again, and the room is plunged into darkness and silence. Cersei sees Hugo rise to his feet and start toward the movable shelf, his hand pressed against his chin in thought. Soren stands beside him, his lack of formal stealth training showing itself as he stands out in the room. Cersei rises up behind the pair and taps them on their shoulders. They spin, hands raised and magic prepared. All they hear is Cersei struggling not to laugh at the fear evident in their expressions.
You should see your faces.
She struggles to get out between heaving breaths and laughter.
You look like you've soiled yourselves.
The 2 lower their hands, shaking their heads and trying not to laugh at themselves. The trio spends a moment calming down when Soren speaks out.
Cersei, Hugo, thank you for helping me with all of this. I don't know what I would have done.
Cersei puts a hand on his shoulder, and Hugo nods his head slightly.
You helped the Guardians deal with Dirgith. Together, we stopped your god from entering this world. It was at a great cost, an unfair cost, one no one should have to pay.
She feels tears brimming in her eyes at the memory of Soren's sister, realizing the strength it would take to do what he had done.
You deserved better, Soren. You are owed this, and more.
Soren wipes his eyes and looks away briefly before standing a little taller.
Let's lay this to rest, once and for all.
Hugo steps forward and says, "This is for the good of all Faerun. Let's not bugger it up." The group turns toward the shelf, working together to move it aside, revealing the trapdoor cut into the stone floor. The circle. Hugo, Cersei, Soren. The hallway was dark and, thankfully, empty. As soon as they entered, they noticed something. The air they breathed, it smelled of nothing. At least, nothing any member of the trio recognized. With no doors to be seen, the hallway ran completely straight. The walls seemed to be made of a smooth, pale stone that glowed faintly, casting a dim light to see by. Hugo ran his hand along it as they walked. Completely smooth. Not a single seam. He tilted his head with curiosity as they walked. "I know a lot about the world. I've never seen stone like this. It feels like it doesn't belong." He shook his head, and Cersei spoke up.
Well, we should keep our distance, then.
The group heeded caution and kept away from the walls. As they walked, the illumination seemed to pulse, thin bands of brighter light rippling outward from where Soren stepped. The light filling the hallway slowly turned green. Soren looked down at his feet as they walk and says,
This feels like a trap. Right?
He turns to look between Cersei and Hugo. Hugo shrugs. If we know it's a trap, it's not a trap. It's a face-off. Cersei stops and looks as if she's about to say something when she feels the ground shift under her. Her vision grows dark, and a few seconds later she finds herself in a large stone room. Soren and Hugo are by her side and look just as disorientated as she does. Scanning the room, she feels bile rise in her throat at the scent of decaying flesh and rotten blood. She falls to her knee as a headless, robed figure rises from behind the altar in the room's center. Pulsing vines of rotten meat cover the altar and create the same symbol seen on the robes of the acolytes bowing in prayer around it. She swallows down the rising bile and takes account of the figures, whispering to her allies.
Must be at least 24 acolytes. Oh, plus the headless one.
Hugo nods, but Soren's head remains down, a thin wisp of greenish power leaking from his eyes, nose, and mouth, carrying the scent of dried bone. She watches Hugo reach a hand out to Soren, when a shape forms in the wispy threads of eldritch magic, a familiar floating skull. Bones. The skull flies toward the headless figure and snaps into place atop his neck. The flesh there crawls up to cover the dried bone in warm, living flesh. A voice calls out, the familiar accent being replaced by a dark baritone. "Ah, Soren, you have returned my skull, whether intentional or not. I thank you." The flesh now fully covers the skull, a handsome elven man with the bearing of royalty. His bedraggled, threadbare robes flourish to life, bright colors and heavy cloth bearing the symbols of an ancient dynasty long lost to time. Soren sits up and slowly lifts off the ground, eyes burning green as he begins to float toward the altar. Hugo reaches for him, but the robed figure snaps his fingers and spectral green vines bind him and Cersei in place. "You too. You'll not be interrupting this time." He smirks with wicked glee, the smile filled with sharpened yellowish teeth. "You called me Bones. An insult, to be sure. These ones call me the Lord of Wrath." He motions toward the bowed supplicants. Their whispers grow louder as Soren's spasming body is brought closer. Cersei feels herself panic as she realizes she can't break the bonds surrounding her. Her memory flashes back to the binding purple fire of Arcan, sitting paralyzed as Yoren fell beside her, Thordak crumbling to ash in her periphery. She feels sweat beading on her forehead as she tries to shadow shift out of the vines. Hugo sat still, calm, waiting for his chance to strike. He'd already tried to cut his binds, but his psi knife wasn't working. He glanced sideways and saw Cersei struggling in vain against the magical bindings. She couldn't do it. She began to shake in fear, the haunting memory of that day 6 years ago threatening to overwhelm her. All she could see with her waking eyes was Yoren's dead expression, his mouth moving in vain as he tried to pull air into his ruined body, his last words ringing in her ears. Then she heard a voice pierce into her mind. Hugo's voice. "Cersei, don't panic. Deep breaths. When our opportunity arises, we need to be ready." She turned to look at him and nodded.
When we can do nothing, we must do nothing.
She felt her heart settle, and she looked ahead, and she finished the phrase.
So when the opportunity arises, we can strike.
The pair watched and listened as the Lord of Wrath lay Soren's body across the vines of flesh, and they began to move, cradling his body and lifting it into the air, green fire lashing along them, drawn from Soren himself. As they followed it, they saw a large circle. It was made up of chain, their dark metal eerily familiar to Cersei, recognizing it as infernal iron, the same metal used to build the chains that would have dragged El Terrell into the river Styx. The fire carried itself along the chains, filling the room with its green light. The shadows all pointed toward the source of light, and the Lord of Wrath raised his hands.
"O mighty Eye, use the bridge and elevate us. Allow our ascendance and make this realm your own."
Cersei felt a deep rumbling and the feeling of shapes moving beneath the skin of reality. A drop in pressure made her ears pop, and the room went silent. Their bindings disappeared, and a gout of green fire filled the circle. A burning smell of caustic smoke and flesh erupted, and for the briefest moment a dark planet with a darker moon and gnarled trees of flesh and bone appeared, leaving Cersei stunned. She briefly noticed Hugo step forward and slash a psi knife down on the chains in front of them. The pressure returned to normal, and the portal snapped shut. Her eyes were wide with uncertainty when she felt her senses return. The circle was now empty stone. The acolytes were missing, as well as the Lord of Wrath. all that remained was a trembling Soren being slowly covered by the fleshy growth, his body snapping and morphing into a new shape. Its green fire fills the flesh with an interior glow of eldritch green. Hugo and Cersei stood stunned as the massive form of flesh stood, a bulbous and corrupted shape barely resembling a person. A towering mass of muscle contracting and expanding with no rhyme or reason. A squelching bellow issued forth, and the creature turned to them.
Consume! Consume! Bridge! Feed!
Without the need to speak, the pair dodged the incoming monstrosity. Cersei used her armor to shift behind it, turning as she watched Hugo throw a blade as he rolled to the side. It sank to the hilt before the flesh around it bubbled and drew it inside. She drew her shortbow and began firing shots at it as she heard Hugo's voice in her head. It seems impervious to harm. Any ideas? She felt her focus shift as she scanned the creature, firing arrows and dodging at speeds beyond a mortal's capabilities. Hugo was doing the same, though he seemed to be relying more on his predictive analysis than his speed. She flipped over a low swipe and was almost hit as its arm turned into a long whip of flesh-covered bone.
We can't let this thing leave.
She watched as a tendril of flesh annihilated a section of floor where she'd just been standing, and felt her muscles begin to ache. The two of them were doing well staying away, but it was only a matter of time until they made a mistake. One mistake would be fatal. Hugo's voice caught her attention again, the telepathy clear, even over the creature's frustrated roars.
Keep its attention! I have an idea!
She grumbled. That was easier said than done. Waving her arms, she shot the creature right where one of Soren's discolored eyes appeared. It sank into his flesh, and yellow-green pus erupted around the arrow as he roared in annoyance.
Shit!
He charged at her, flesh splitting as a dozen fleshy growths all reached for her.
Consume you! Feed me!
She stopped and took one deep breath. Sheathing her bow and drawing her twin short swords, she opened her eyes and moved. She flipped and spun, becoming a whirlwind of slashing blades and cut flesh. Soren roared as the growths were cut off, the wet chunks of bloodless flesh hitting the ground and sliding back towards his mass. All of a sudden, he shuddered, and for a fraction of a second, he stopped moving. She tilted her head and had time to breathe for a moment before Soren resumed his assault. She heard Hugo once again.
The chains are anchored with something, some fleshy pittons holding them in place. I just cut one in half.
She felt her muscles trembling as she continued to dodge and cut with insane speed.
Then keep going. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this up.
This continued for the next few minutes. Cersei knew the only thing keeping her going was pure adrenaline.
Halfway done, Cersei. Just keep going.
She felt her heart was going to burst when it happened. A mistake. Over the course of their battle, the ground had grown scored with lines of broken stone and turned earth. One of those stones shifted under her feet, and she landed and fell, uncontrolled, to the ground. She watched with horror, and time seemed to slow as a mass of flesh shot toward her. There was no time, no way to dodge. She closed her eyes and waited for whatever was to come. Light. Radiant light. Warmth. And a familiar voice. Cersei. She opened her eyes to see an armored form wearing adamantite plate, bearing the shield of Gargareth, standing over her. The fleshy growths sizzled as they tried to wrap around his shield. He helped her up and nodded, his golden eyes visible beneath his helm. Ilmata sends his regards. My connection is tenuous, but I've got a few seconds. The familiar figure of Yoren placed his hand on Cersei's shoulders, and she felt renewed strength fill her. Go help Hugo. I want to speak to Soren. She watched him remove his helmet and turn away. She immediately turned to see a stunned Hugo watching in disbelief.
Focus, Hugo! Cut the pittons!
He snaps back to his task, slashing at the pittons back and forth as Cersei moves to the next in line, seeing that only two remain. Yoren stepped toward the fleshy monstrosity, swallowing down his fear. Soren. He extends a hand and hovers it over the now stilled creature. What have they done to you, brother? It glows gold, and where the wispy radiant light meets the greenish glow, it fizzles and fades. This isn't right. Soren's eyes appear to him, then flicker back to their original piercing grey for a moment.
I would have fought with you, my brother.
Yoren feels tears brimming as his connection begins to falter. He turns and sees Hugo move to the last pitten, Cersei following after him. Looking down, his hand begins to grow transparent, what remains of his soul returning back to the afterlife. It'll be over soon. Feel not shame, but pride. You've saved the world 3 times now. I'll be waiting. Soren's eyes grow desperate as Yoren's form fades. The dark rage, the dark thirst, fills him again as he watches his friend disappear. Cersei looks behind her as Yoren talks to Soren, their conversation failing to reach her ears.
Looks like we're clear, Hugo. Yoren's got him talking.
Hugo nods as he swings his knife, hacking at the last pitten. She turns once more to see Soren's tears as Yoren vanishes. She turns back, making a mistake. Her fatal mistake. The thirst fills him to bursting, the dark desire to live and consume pushing down his rational thought, and he sees his target. Hacking away at the last bond that ties him to this power, and it rages. Launching its strike, a piercing tendril tipped with a serrated bone. She feels the air shift and sees the spear, sees its target. Her weapons are sheathed, no time to draw them. She can't deflect the tendril. Hugo hasn't seen it yet. He isn't fast enough. She makes her decision. Using her legendary speed, she steps into the spear's path. All goes black as she feels it rip through her chest. All is darkness, until a candle is lit, and she stands over her impaled body, the candlelight illuminating the grisly scene. She watches as Hugo holds his hand in the air, ready to deliver the final strike to the pitten. Time froze at the moment of her death. She feels a cold hand rest on her shoulder, and the whispering sound of wind blown through autumn leaves. Cersei, we meet again. She turns to see the towering form of the Raven Queen. Cersei meets her gaze.
What's the meaning of this? I've cheated death many times. To die saving a friend, to save the world, is more than acceptable.
A wispy chuckle emanates from underneath the White Raven's mask. You've cheated me many times, but you've also delivered to me many worthy souls. Her mask tilts down. I'd make you an offer, Cersei. 2 options lie before you. She waves a hand, and 2 doors appear beside her. One of solid dark wood with rusted fittings, and one of solid gold, trimmed in silver and bronze. Cersei approaches the doors as the Raven Queen speaks. Behind the door of wood lies a return to life. You will live out the extent of your natural years, but upon your death, you will serve me. You will be my champion, an extension of my will on Faerun. She breathes in a wheezing breath, like the sound of stone dragged across stone. Take the gold door, and you will die. Your soul will go where it was supposed to, and our interactions are finished. You will rest. Cersei ran her hand down the golden door, feeling the strangely warm metal under her hand. She felt her exhaustion then. She'd been fighting for so long. How many times did one have to save the world before they could rest? She almost took it. Her hand drifted toward the handle. Then she stopped, looking back to see the room, the battle that still took place.
I'll do it. Once I'm done, I'm yours.
Without looking back, she took the wooden door's iron handle and walked through it. She felt the spear leave her body and the wound close behind it as Hugo slashed down one final time. The pitten split, and an incredible green radiance filled the room as the internal light filling Soren's massive form grew brighter and his flesh began to split and sizzle. With a roar of defiance, the flesh exploded out and he vanished. A last telepathic whisper saying 3 words as a pile of ash appeared on the floor where he stood.
Thank you, friend.
She fell to her knees at the suddenness of it. Surely that can't be it. All that power gone, just like that? Hugo, seeming to sense her caution, stepped forward and placed a careful hand on her shoulder. We did it, Cersei. He's gone. She shook her head to clear it and faced him.
It isn't right. He didn't deserve it.
Hugo nodded grimly, slowly guiding her as the room seems to shift back to the hallway they stood in before. Epilogue. Hugo, Cersei, Helio, Oren. After informing the Conclave of what had taken place, the pair got a good night's rest. The duo woke up and went to find Oren the next morning, walking to his home in Waterdeep to find Helio was already there. Oren wrapped his remaining arm around Cersei in a tight hug that almost squeezed the life out of her.
Cersei!
He picked her up and spun her around.
What took you so long?
He grinned. Helio spoke next. His wizened frame leaned heavily on his cane.
I told him you were coming soon after I spoke to you through my raven.
He also wrapped her in a hug, this one a bit gentler and leaving her with more breath in her lungs. Oren and Helio looked at Hugo with raised eyebrows.
You brought this half-wit with you and not me?
Helio said with a cheeky grin. Hugo chuckled and playfully punched Helio's shoulder. Well, if you could still swing a sword half as well as you talk shit, maybe you could have come along. Helio belted out a laugh that turned into a coughing fit.
You rat bastard, come here!
Helio hobbled over and gave him a quick hug.
Righto, Sneaky. Now it's my turn.
Oren stepped over and wrapped a muscled arm around Hugo's waist and picked him up like he had Cersei. Hugo choked out a protest that was quickly replaced with a laugh as Oren carried him inside.
Time for drinks, you lousy bastards,
belted out Oren as Hugo struggled in his grip. The four of them sat outside in Oren's spacious backyard and pulled some chairs up to a small campfire as drinks were passed around. Cersei and Hugo told the others of what had happened. To raucous applause and cheers and laughter. When Cersei spoke of Soren and his passing, the mood turned bittersweet. Oren spoke up first.
I always regretted what we did to him. He deserves so much better.
He raised his mug of gnomish mead.
To Soren, if he were here, I'd just let him know how much of a hero he really was.
The small gathering raised a toast and drank deeply to his memory, laying the tiefling to rest. As they sat and enjoyed the fresh air underneath a massive oak tree in Oren's backyard, Cersei found herself looking at the sunset when she saw movement. A tall figure in a raven's cloak merely placed a finger to the lips of her raven's mask and nodded, a grim reminder of what the price of her life had been. As quickly as the figure had appeared, it vanished, and she shook her head. Coming back to the conversation, Hugo was regaling them all with some tales of his own, admittedly less world-ending, adventures. They laughed, they cheered, they cried, and they moved on. The world was safe again for now, and the threat had been laid to rest. Right? A dark room. A door creaks open to reveal a tall, old Aarakocra. Accompanied by a much younger man of the same race, they studied the form suspended in dozens of stasis and restraint spells before them.
The spell was a success, O Feathered One. The warlock was brought here and contained. The pile of ash sent to replace him was effective.
The tall one speaks.
I'm grateful for your efforts, my apprentice. He could prove to be a powerful weapon for Eberron, if properly controlled.
He turned to look at the young man, revealing a cracked beak and purple eyes.
And please, call me Bliers.
The young man bowed deeply, saying,
For Eberron, for the Aarakocra, for the black feathers.